There's a specific kind of person who will never say anything cruel to you. They won't raise their voice. They won't insult you directly. They might even tell you they care about you. And if you tried to explain to someone else what's been bothering you about them, you'd struggle to find the words because nothing happened exactly, nothing you could point to. But something is happening. You can feel it. You walk away from time with them feeling just a little bit smaller than when you arrived, a little less sure of yourself, a little more quiet. Like somewhere in the conversation, without either of you acknowledging it, a verdict was handed down about you, and it wasn't a good one. And then comes the part that makes it worse. You start wondering if maybe it's you. Maybe you're reading too much into things. Maybe you're being unfair to them. They've never actually done anything wrong, right? So you let it go. And the next time it happens, you let it go again. Here's what I need you to hear before we go any further. You're not imagining it. What you're picking up on is real. It has a name, it has a pattern. And once you can see the pattern clearly, something shifts, not just in how you see them, but in how you see yourself. Today, we're going through 7 signs that someone secretly looks down on you. Not the loud, obvious version, but the quiet version, the kind that lives in small moments and leaves you questioning yourself instead of questioning them. Some of these will feel like recognition, like finally having a name for something you've been carrying for a long time. Let's get into it. Sign 1. They treat your time like it's less valuable than theirs. Pay attention to this one because it's so normalized we've stopped seeing it clearly. They're late, consistently, not dramatically late, not 2 hours, not something so obvious you could call it out without feeling unreasonable. Just late enough, 10 minutes, 15, sometimes more, and they have a reason every time. Traffic, a call that ran long, something came up, and you wait. Because what else are you going to do? But here's what I want you to notice. It's not just the lateness. It's everything around the lateness. Do they apologize genuinely? Or do they arrive and launch straight into conversation like nothing happened? Like your time sitting there waiting simply doesn't count in the ledger? Do they make adjustments after the first time, the second time? Or does it keep happening at the same rhythm, in the same casual way, like a habit they've never thought to examine? Because that's the tell. Lateness alone isn't contempt. Life happens. People are genuinely overwhelmed. But consistent lateness with no real accountability, no change, no weight given to the inconvenience it causes you, that's a values statement. It says, without ever saying it, my time matters. Yours is more flexible, and it extends beyond physical punctuality. They cancel plans last minute, not in emergencies, or not only in emergencies, but whenever something slightly more interesting comes up, or whenever the inconvenience of following through outweighs whatever they get from seeing you. And you find yourself adjusting, rescheduling, saying it's fine when it isn't entirely fine because you've unconsciously decided that maintaining the relationship requires you to absorb these small costs. But watch what happens when the situation is reversed. If you're the one who's late, even once, even by a few minutes, is there a shift in energy, a comment, maybe subtle, about how they've been waiting, a silence that communicates something? Because people who genuinely see you as an equal don't apply different standards to themselves than they apply to you. That inconsistency, when you see it clearly, is information. There's a concept in psychology called asymmetrical investment, and it describes exactly this dynamic. In relationships where one person consistently positions themselves above the other, you'll find that the higher status person, at least in their own internal hierarchy, sets the terms. They decide when you meet, how long it lasts, and whether they're fully present when you're together. The lower status person, whether they've ever articulated this to themselves or not, accommodates. They fill the gaps, they make it work. And here's what makes it so difficult to name. It feels like flexibility. It feels like you being the bigger person, the easier person to be around, the one who doesn't make things complicated. And that framing is comfortable, so you keep it. But flexibility that only ever flows in one direction isn't flexibility. It's deference. And deference that was never asked for, but always expected, is a dynamic worth examining. Now, does this mean you should start keeping score, timing every arrival, cataloging every canceled plan? No. That's not the point, and it's not sustainable. The point is to get honest with yourself about the pattern, not the individual incidents, the pattern. Because one late arrival is a bad day. 10 late arrivals across 6 months, each one absorbed quietly, each one explained away. That's a dynamic. That's a relationship where at some level it has been established that your time is available and their time is reserved. You didn't negotiate that. You probably didn't even notice it happening, but somewhere it got decided and you're the one who's been living inside that decision. Here's the simplest question to ask yourself. If the situation were reversed, if you consistently treated time the way they treat yours, would they accept it as easily as you do? Would they make the same adjustments without comment, without friction? If the honest answer is no, then you already know what that gap is telling you. Sign two, they tell your stories better than they let you tell them, Mom. This one is hard to catch in the moment because it often comes wrapped in something that looks like enthusiasm. You're in a group, you start telling a story, something that happened to you, something you experienced, something you were actually there for. And before you can get to the part that matters, they jump in, not to correct you, not aggressively, just to help, apparently. Oh, tell them the part about, wait, actually the funniest part is no. What happened was, and suddenly it's their story. They're telling it. The group is looking at them. You're standing there nodding along to something that happened to you, effectively becoming an audience member in your own experience. And afterward, if you tried to explain why that bothered you, you'd sound absurd. They were just excited. They were just, filling in details. They made the story better, probably. So you say nothing, and it keeps happening. And slowly, without you deciding this, you start telling fewer stories when they're around. You start waiting to see if it's worth starting, knowing how it usually ends. Here's what's actually happening underneath the surface. Storytelling in a social group is a form of status. When you hold the floor, when people are listening to you, when you're the one guiding the emotional journey of a story from setup to landing, that's influence, it's presence, it's the group briefly organizing itself around you. And a person who, consciously or not, positions themselves above you will find that difficult to tolerate for long. Interrupting your story, especially to tell it better, especially to become the one the group turns toward, is a way of reclaiming that floor. It's a way of saying, without saying it, that they can do what you're doing more effectively than you can. And if they do it consistently, the group learns something. The group starts treating them as the more reliable narrator, the more entertaining one, the one worth listening to when both of you are in the room. Now, here's the part that makes this particularly insidious. They might genuinely believe they're helping. Some people who do this have never examined it. They jump in because they can feel the story, because they're high energy, because they get excited. And when you look hurt or withdrawn, they're genuinely confused. They weren't trying to do anything. But impact and intention are different things. The question isn't whether they meant to take the floor from you. The question is whether they've noticed that they do it, whether they've ever adjusted, whether your discomfort has registered enough to change the pattern at all. Because that's the part where character shows itself. There's something else worth noticing here. Pay attention to whose stories they protect versus whose they interrupt. In most groups, this person is selective. They let certain people finish, they wait, they follow, and with other people they respect, people whose status they aren't quietly competing with, they'd never dream of jumping in mid-sentence. That selectivity is data. It tells you where you sit in their internal map of people, not where you should sit, not where you actually sit in the room, where you sit in their private hierarchy of who deserves space and who they can casually talk over. There's a psychologist named Deborah Tannen who spent years studying what she called conversational dominance, the ways people use language not just to communicate, but to establish and maintain social position. And one of the clearest patterns she identified was exactly this. The person who controls the story controls the room. When someone consistently takes that control from you, specifically from you, that's not accidental enthusiasm. That's positioning, and you deserve to be in rooms and around people who let you finish your own sentences, who wait for the landing, who understand that your story isn't a rough draft waiting for their polish. It's yours, and the right people will let it be. Sign 3. They give you advice you didn't ask for. Constantly telegraph it. There's a difference between someone who offers help and someone who can't seem to be around you without finding something to fix. You know the type. You mention you've been tired lately, and before you finish the sentence, they're telling you about a sleep schedule, a supplement, a book you should read, a habit you clearly haven't thought of because if you had, you wouldn't be tired. You share a decision you've already made, and instead of engaging with it, they immediately start poking at the edges. Have you considered the issue with that approach is, I would have done it differently. You didn't ask. You weren't looking for input. You were sharing something. But the sharing got converted automatically into a problem for them to solve. Now, here's what makes this complicated. Some people are just fixers. They're wired to respond to any expression of difficulty with solutions. It's how they show care. And in those people, the unsolicited advice is genuinely not about hierarchy. It's about their own discomfort with sitting in someone else's uncertainty without doing something. So how do you tell the difference? You look at who they do it with. If someone gives unsolicited advice to everyone equally, if they jump in with suggestions for their closest friends, their colleagues, their family across the board, that's a personality pattern. That's the fixer type. It's worth addressing, but it's not contempt. But if they seem to specifically focus their correction energy on you, if they let other people make statements without immediately appending improvements, if they sit comfortably with other people's decisions but can't seem to tolerate yours without commentary, that selectivity is the tell. Because what unsolicited advice communicates at its core is a belief. The belief that the other person hasn't thought carefully enough, that their current plan, their current approach, their current state of being is a draft in need of revision, and that you, specifically you standing here, are equipped to provide the revision they didn't know they needed. That's a one-up position, dressed as helpfulness, but still one-up. There's something in social psychology called the competence assumption, and it describes how we unconsciously attribute different levels of capability to different people before they've even demonstrated anything. When we assume competence in someone, we wait for them to solve their own problems. We might offer help if asked, but we trust them to ask if they need it. When we don't assume competence, when something in our assessment of a person positions them as less capable, less thoughtful, less equipped, we jump in, we course correct, we can't seem to help ourselves. The person giving you unsolicited advice constantly may never have articulated this to themselves, but somewhere beneath the surface, there's a quiet assumption that you need more guidance than the average person they spend time with. And over time, if you absorb enough of it, you start to internalize that assumption. You start running your decisions through their imagined filter before you make them. You anticipate the critique. You pre-defend yourself in your own head. You start second-guessing things you were perfectly clear on before you mention them, not because new information changed your mind, but because their steady stream of correction has eroded your confidence in your own judgment. That erosion, slow and quiet as it is not an accident. It might not be conscious, but it is the predictable outcome of a dynamic where one person has positioned themselves as the default expert on your life. Here's the simplest, most effective way I know to test this pattern. Stop sharing your decisions with them before they're made. Only tell them about things after they're done, and notice whether the advice still comes. Because if they're still finding things to improve, things to correct, things you should have done differently, on decisions that are already made, already finished, already out of your hands, then the advice was never actually about helping you. It was about maintaining a position above you, and now you see it clearly. Sign 4. They remember things selectively. Everyone forgets things. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a specific, consistent pattern of forgetting that moves in one direction. They forget the things you told them. The thing you mentioned was important to you. The update you gave them 2 weeks ago on something you were nervous about. The thing you asked them not to bring up in certain company. They forget every time. And when you notice When you feel the sting of it, you tell yourself, they're busy. They have a lot going on. It's not personal. But watch what they remember. They remember the exact thing someone else said at dinner 6 months ago. They can recall in detail a story a mutual friend told them years back. They follow up, unprompted, on things other people mentioned in passing. They ask about the trip someone's planning, the promotion someone was hoping for, the thing someone mentioned once and clearly didn't expect to be remembered. That's not a memory problem. That's a priority problem. We remember what we're invested in, what we're genuinely interested in. Our brains are remarkably selective. And one of the clearest ways that selectivity reveals itself is in what we retain about the people in our lives. When someone consistently retains information about other people but not about you, when you have to re-explain yourself, reintroduce context, remind them of things you've told them more than once. That gap is information. It's saying that your life, your updates, your concerns aren't registering in the way that other people's do. And here's what makes this particularly painful. You probably notice it mostly in the moments it should have mattered. You told them you were going through something difficult, and the next time you saw them, they asked nothing, didn't reference it, either forgot or didn't register it enough to store it. You mentioned something you were proud of, and like a week later, it was gone, like it had been written on water. Meanwhile, you, because you're wired to care, because you actually listen, because you track the people you love, you remember their things. You ask about them. You follow up. And somewhere in the asymmetry of that, if you're honest, something has always quietly hurt. There's a researcher named Sarah Algo at the University of North Carolina who studies something called perceived partner responsiveness, which is essentially the feeling that the people in your life are paying attention to you, that they see you, that your inner world registers to them as real and worth engaging with. And her research found that this feeling of being genuinely attended to is one of the strongest predictors of relationship quality and personal well-being we have. The opposite of that feeling has a specific texture. It's the texture of repeating yourself to someone who should already know, of filling them in on your own life like a stranger who happened to ask, of slowly learning not to share the things that matter most to you, because the experience of watching them forget it hurts more than just keeping it to yourself would. And so you start quietly editing yourself around them. You stop mentioning the things you care about. You save those for other people, people who actually hold them. The relationship gets flatter, shallower, more surface, and they might not even notice because the depth was mostly coming from you anyway. Now, here's what I want you to hold on to. The things that happened to you were real. They mattered. The fact that they didn't register for someone else doesn't diminish them. It just tells you something about the person who didn't register them. You were not forgettable. You were just telling the wrong person. And now that you can see that clearly, you get to decide what you share with them going forward, not in anger, not to punish them, but because your inner life deserves to be held by people who actually hold it. Sign 5, they talk about you differently when you're not there, Malay. You'll almost never see this one directly, but you'll feel the echoes of it. It shows up in small, strange ways. The way someone you just met already seems to have an impression of you that doesn't quite match reality. The way a mutual friend says something that reveals a detail, a version of a story, a characterization that you didn't give them, that could only have come from one place. The way the dynamic in a group subtly shifts when that person is there versus when they're not. Something is being said about you in the rooms you don't enter, and the version being told is smaller than the one you'd recognize. Here's how this works. Every person in a social group is, in part, how they've been described to others. Before you open your mouth in a new setting, before you've had a chance to make an impression, someone else has often already made one for you. And a person who holds contempt for you will use those private conversations to do something very specific. They will frame you in a way that keeps you positioned below them. They won't always say anything overtly negative. That would be too obvious, too easy to trace back. Instead, it's done through emphasis and omission. The story they tell about you is almost accurate, almost fair, except for what's left out and what's slightly exaggerated. They mention your mistake without mentioning the context. They share your struggle without sharing your progress. They laugh about something you did in a way that sounds light but lands as dismissive. They introduce you in ways that lead with what you're still working toward rather than what you've already built. And the people hearing this don't know they're getting a curated version. Why would they question it? It seems casual. It seems like someone just sharing, not strategically shaping how others see you, but it is shaping quietly, consistently. There's a concept in social psychology called impression management, the idea that people don't just communicate, they manage how they and others are perceived. Most people do this with themselves, but someone who quietly looks down on you does something else. They manage you. In their environment, they become your narrator, and they've already decided what your role is. So, how do you recognize something you never directly hear? You watch how you're received. Is there a pattern of people meeting you with a subtle hesitation, like they've already formed an opinion? Is there a slight distance from mutual connections that doesn't match your actual interactions with them? Do you find yourself having to prove who you are more than you should in spaces where this is central? That effort you feel is real. You're not imagining it. You're compensating for a version of you that arrived before you did. Now, here's what matters. Don't let this turn into paranoia. Not every awkward interaction has a hidden source. Not every cold moment is engineered. People are complex, and most friction is just that, friction. But when the pattern is consistent, when it keeps tracing back to the same person, then it's no longer random. It's a signal. And here's the deeper truth. Your real reputation is not what one person says about you when you're not there. It's what people experience when they are with you. That cannot be erased. It can be delayed, it can be distorted for a while, but it cannot be permanently replaced because real presence always overrides secondhand stories. The people who matter will see it. They'll notice the gap between what they heard and what they experience. And over time, that gap speaks louder than anything said behind your back. You don't need to chase every room you're not in. You don't need to correct every version of yourself that gets told. You just need to keep showing up as someone real enough that the truth eventually replaces the story. Sign 6. They shrink your ambitions without touching them. This one is the quietest of all, and in some ways, the most damaging, because it doesn't look like anything. There's no argument, no obvious discouragement. No one tells you that your goal is unrealistic, that you're overreaching, that you should aim lower. None of that. What happens instead is more atmospheric, subtler, like a slight cooling of the air in the room every time certain topics come up. You share something you're building toward, a goal, a plan, something you're quietly excited about, maybe a little nervous about, maybe just beginning to believe in, and they listen, they nod, maybe they say something reasonably supportive. That's interesting. We'll see how it goes. Good luck with that. And you leave the conversation feeling less lit up than when you started. You can't say why. They didn't say anything wrong, but something got smaller. Here's what actually happened. There's a thing people do when they're not willing to celebrate something, but also don't want to be caught discouraging it. They respond with words that are technically neutral, but they deliver them in a tone, a pace, a flatness that communicates something entirely different. The words say fine. The energy says, I don't believe in this. And you, because you were paying attention, because you care what they think, because somewhere you were hoping for a different response, you picked up the energy. Not the words. The energy. This is sometimes called a non-response response, and it's more destabilizing than direct criticism in many ways because you can't push back on it. You can't say, you told me you didn't believe in me, because technically they didn't. They said the right things. They were supportive, technically. And if you tried to explain why you left the conversation feeling deflated, you'd sound unreasonable. So the doubt just sits there, undefended against, because there was nothing to defend against. Now here's where it gets more specific. Pay attention to whether they do this selectively. Do they respond to their own goals, their own projects with entirely different energy? Does their tone lift when talking about their own plans, their own progress, their own ambitions? Do they engage other people's goals with warmth and follow-up questions? And then bring that same energy when it's yours and notice the difference. Because a person who finds it difficult to be genuinely enthusiastic about your future, specifically your future, while remaining capable of enthusiasm in general, is telling you something about your place in their internal map. Your growth is not something they are rooting for. Your success is not something they're invested in. And on some level, they are more comfortable with you as you are right now, uncertain and unfinished, than they would be with a version of you who got where you were going. There's a concept in psychology called tall poppy syndrome, though it extends well beyond any one culture. It describes the social tendency to resent, undercut, and push back against people who begin to stand out, to rise above the group's current level. And it operates most powerfully not through direct opposition, but through passive deflation, through the removal of warmth at exactly the moments when warmth would have mattered most. The person doing this may not even be consciously aware of it. What they feel when you share your ambitions might just be a vague discomfort, a tightening, a need to reestablish equilibrium. And the way it comes out is in a tone that doesn't quite celebrate you. But here's what I want you to hold on to. You get to protect what you're building. You don't have to share it with everyone. Some things deserve to be grown in private, away from the cooling air of people who can't quite want it for you. The people who genuinely root for you, who lean forward when you talk about your goals, who ask questions, who remember to follow up, those people exist. They are not rare, but they are specific, and you will find them when you stop looking for that response from people who are constitutionally unable to give it. Your ambition is not the problem. The audience was. So now you have the 7 signs. And if you recognize yourself in more than one of them, if there was a person or maybe more than one person who came to mind as you were listening, I want to be clear about something. This is not about building a case against them. It's not about confrontation, not about cutting people off dramatically, not about turning their behavior into the center of your story. That's not what this is for. This is for you, for the quiet relief of finally being able to name something you've been living inside of. That feeling you couldn't explain, the one that made you feel smaller than you are without ever giving you a clear reason why, the pattern that made you question your own perception, your memory, your sense of reality. Now you have language for it. And once you can name something, it loses a specific kind of power over you. Not all of its power, but the power that comes from being invisible, from being something you feel but can't articulate, something that exists in the gap between what happened and what you can point to. When you can see the pattern clearly, something shifts. You stop filling in the blanks for them. You stop absorbing everything quietly and turning it into doubt about yourself. You stop asking, am I overreacting? And you start seeing it for what it is. Information, not probably nothing. Not I'm being too sensitive, but clear, consistent, honest information about where you stand with someone and what that relationship is actually made of. And that kind of clarity changes everything because now you don't have to force anything. You don't have to confront. You don't have to explain. You just start choosing differently. Who gets your time? Who gets your attention? Who gets access to your stories, your ambitions, your energy? That's where your power is, not in reacting to them, but in no longer giving yourself to something that quietly takes from you. If this hit close to home, I want to hear from you. Which sign stood out the most? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.